Hey, it's Tom Seymour from New York City. This is VHS Massacre Radio, and this is a podcast that talks a bit about film industry stuff. Basically, I've been hitting the film festival circuit pretty heavy, so I'm finding this subject fascinating. I figured maybe I can tell you guys what I'm going through. There are young filmmakers who this may be of interest to. I teach at a college, and one of the things I see is I wouldn't call it a division, but I would say that some of the younger people are watching more and more video on YouTube and very short content on things like TikTok and Instagram, stuff like that. And that stuff's all great, but this is more about making a product that, let's say, a narrative or documentary, something that is going to require months and months of work to create a high quality. Now, you can do it on YouTube, but the sort of one-off viral video is a harder thing to do, and it's a harder thing to suddenly make money off statistically. Like, you have a better shot of being an NBA basketball player than making six figures a year off YouTube. So the odds are not great, and that's a real statistic. I actually had to crunch that for a paper. What you have is people on YouTube doing well on YouTube, but they're doing it by cranking out content weekly and sometimes on a daily basis, which is not really what I'm talking about. So and we have some of our students in our video production classes do want to do that, and that is awesome. But there is this other avenue, and the other avenue is sort of like documentary or narrative film, something that you're going to be spending months or years on to create the highest quality you can. And then the question is, what do you do with it? And dumping it directly on YouTube is a much harder game unless you already have some established, big subscriber base, or you can buddy up with a larger channel. And that stuff can be great. And actually, there are contests that people enter, submitting stuff through YouTube, which do lead to careers, so that definitely can happen. But another avenue is the film festival circuit, and definitely careers are forged from this. I think if you're interested in doing independent films, meaning like you really want to make this film yourself, and you don't want to make someone else's film, then the film festival circuit is probably a good place to start when you finish your film. Now, I have an unusual career in the sense that I've worked inside the studio and television network system. I worked for CBS News. I worked for NBC Universal Digital Studios. At Black 20, we did a bunch of content. I think they were saying it was somewhere around 100 million views web-wide. And so we were in the early days of YouTube too. So my career is sort of like a Swiss Army knife in regard to different areas. In regard to film festivals, this is a place where you can enter your film. I recommend using Film Freeway, because what you do is you set up one press kit, and then from there you can enter most of the major film festivals. There's still some that you can't, like Cannes. You can't enter that through Film Freeway, but there are other ones that you can. We won Best Documentary at Cannes World, which is not Cannes, but it's a competitor that is important and runs at the same time in the same cities. So it's sort of like the Slam Dance to the Sundance. So there are festivals like that which you may have a shot at, and that's a whole thing I learned about the whole film festival circuit. So to really talk about this, I want to kind of go back to my youth. So in the mid-'90s, I was, my senior year of high school, I was actually making short films. I had bought a VHS camcorder, a half-broken one, used from a pawn shop, and it barely worked. And we started making videos, and what we could actually do is edit them by basically using a VCR and the camera. And what you do is you pause the VCR and use that as an editing technique to use the part of the take you wanted. So I was making movies like that because I grew up in a middle class family in Central Connecticut. My dad's an engineer, my mom's a nurse, and we just didn't have that. Electronics were very expensive back then, and so our stuff was like, who had a camcorder? The next door neighbor had a Super 8 camera, so I shot film on Super 8. My grandmother had, this, so you were borrowing things that you could use. So with those films, one of the first ones I made was Money Run. It was a ridiculous, sort of heist movie with a car chase, with us driving around our cars in the snow and skidding and doing all sorts of weird stuff. So I had narration over the film. So one of the things I thought was cool was I was getting my car painted. And my parents helped me to buy this really old Datsun, and it was primer black. And so we paid a couple $100 to get it painted, and we got it painted white. So I knew it was going to be painted. So in the film, I narrated, so the main character drove up in a black car. No, wait, it was a white car. And so what I did is when I got it painted, then I shot that scene. And so it was kind of clever things that happened like that, where I thought the film was fun. And so when I entered it into this contest called the Connecticut Screening Room, which I really didn't know much about, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure where I even heard about it. It might have been through high school, a flyer or something like that. This was very early internet. It wouldn't have been on there. And so I entered that, and I actually won Best Student Film. So that sort of kind of got me addicted to film festivals. And then from there, I went to community college for video production, and I volunteered at public access station, and I was making my own films. And from there, that's how I got this vacation relief position at CBS, which you'd come in the middle of the night to enter at 3 in the morning. You get up and drive into Hartford to edit the news when someone called out sick. Like, it was a horrendous job that paid pretty poorly, but it got me in the door, and I was able to work my way up to staff editor. So that's how that was my entry point. If anyone is curious about how it can be done, I actually think that step path is still viable to some degree, although you'd probably need a BA to start with, not an AS. So in regard to film festivals, I kind of caught the bug, and so I would go on to make more and more films. But the films that I was making, I made this one called Thrill Kill Jack in Hale Manor. It was about this guy who gets his mystical gun stolen. And it was, there was no budget. We were a bunch of teenagers running around doing ridiculous stunts. And it was made more in the sort of spirit of trauma with, sort of blood and guts type of stuff. But the thing is, when you're young, you're kind of, some of us, I'll say me, can be delusional about what you actually made, So there's this ambition to want to enter like Sundance and Cannes, and you want to enter these large festivals, these important festivals like Toronto and Tribeca, And the thing is, I did that for years and years. With the films that I made, there's one called Land of College Prophets or Fountain of Death. It was called in Spain, which I like. That title's cooler, so I like that one. And it was this basically kind of like a trauma type movie. It was like gross out sci-fi brawler movie. It was crass. It was silly. It did get distribution. York Entertainment picked it up, and it basically went all over the world. It sold 10 different territories and was in all the video stores. And that deal I got was actually because of film festivals. We entered a bunch of film festivals, including the B-Movie Film Festival, Bare Bones International. There were a bunch of other ones that we entered, and we ended up winning, I think, something like 7 or 8 awards. And the thing is, that actually helped at the time. Winning a bunch of awards put us in a strong position when we went to a distributor. We could say, look, you could treat this like a festival movie, because even though it's an action movie, it won all these awards. And York loved it, and it worked. And I recall seeing it. It was a video gallery, and it was like a whole roll of my movies, and I was 24 at the time, so it was like a big deal. So that being said, that the film festival, I think, works, and I think it still works like that, even though we've gone to the streaming era, and I can give you examples of that as well. But what I would say, the thing that I learned is that you really have to look at what you made and sort of come to terms with it and be humble with it, right? So one of the successes I had in the festival circuit was VHS Massacre and then VHS Massacre 2. Now, VHS Massacre 1, I entered probably about maybe 20 or 30 film festivals. We got into about 10, and we won like 5 awards. But the thing is, there's a lot of festivals we didn't get into. It might have even been higher than maybe 35 festivals, something like that. And the reason why we didn't get into a lot of them was because I was treating VHS Massacre, which was a feature-length documentary about the decline of physical media and the death of the decline of the mom and pop video store. I was treating like it was an important documentary about climate change or something. And the thing was, I would spend literally thousands of dollars. I'd save up and I'd partner up, and we'd slowly enter festivals over the course of a year because we couldn't afford to do it all at once. And to some degree, I was throwing my money out the window because there was this stubborn part of me who would say, I want to play at Park City. I want to play at Sundance. I want to play at Slam Dance, So I would enter these Park City festivals. I would enter Tribeca because I live in New York. I would enter some of the major festivals, and I would go through the top 10 essentially and enter a lot of those. San Francisco Film Festival. And the thing is, those films are probably never going to take something like I made. I essentially made a film that could be called like a genre film, examining mostly horror and exploitation. And I was asking these like New York film festivals, these high-end festivals, to sort of take notice of me. There's a few reasons why that probably is not going to work. One is that if you talk to anyone who's gotten into Sundance or Tribeca, they have either they usually have a producer's rep, which means there's someone selling their film. They have a powerful agent, or the film maybe had already been acquired. Sometimes the film is made by the studio, and if it's made internally, if it's made by the studio, then they can get in any festival they want, pretty much. I mean, those festivals like Tribeca and Sundance and New York Film Festival, those are not independent. They're not really for us. They've been bought and sold, decades ago. They're really just an arm of the studio system. They're a vassal of the studio system. They're really designed just to give extra press to studio products. So that's what you slowly realize over the years. And the people who have gotten in, if you dig deep enough, they're like, yeah, I knew this guy. This guy's my best friend. He works at blank. That happens occasionally too. So you're talking about nepotism. And, nepotism is, it's not fun when you hear about it, but it's hard to really counteract. It's really hard to do anything about that. So what are you left to do? Well, one thing is acknowledge what genre you made and enter film festivals that make sense. So for VHS Massacre 2, I'm basically going to contrast this with VHS Massacre 1. What had happened is the first VHS Massacre seemed to have legs. Many years after it came out, It was still getting reviews. People were still watching it. Art house streaming sites like Mubi were streaming it, and the reviews overall were positive. And basically things were changing so much rapidly with streaming, and it was affecting independent filmmakers so much. I thought, wow, I know this is not typically, it's not typical to make a sequel to a feature-length doc, but that's what I want to do. So I made VHS Massacre 2. That one concentrated on how media consolidation has almost killed the American exploitation film, meaning market exploitation. These films are genre films that are marketed in very extreme or titillating ways in order to, get people to watch them. It's just horror and things like that. I think of trauma films, So, basically, with VHS 2, when I finished it, I knew it was important for me to talk about these people, talk about Roger Corman and Lloyd Kaufman and Debbie Rochon and Joe Bob Briggs, and basically say, look, these films ended. I think these films are actually more important than you would think because they push the boundaries of taste, and that's actually getting censored off of these streaming sites through omission and through basically starving them out by offering them terrible residuals and stuff like that. And that goes as far as even YouTube. People are getting terrible residuals off YouTube. So when I made that film, I for the film festival circuit, the thought was that, dude, this is a sequel to a documentary that not as everyone has seen. I have no idea what this is going to do. We need to enter only festivals that we think we have a strong shot at, only festivals that are into B movies or horror movies or exploitation movies, smaller festivals, things that are like 100% aligned with it. So again, we entered probably 40 or 50 film festivals. We were now in the beginning of the pandemic, and my partner Tim Kulig and I were like, let's just hit this hard. I mean, it was a way to some degree of coping with the circumstances, And so what happened was we've gotten into, I'm probably rounding up, but we probably have about 40 official selections. We've won 20 awards so far, including San Francisco Indie Fest's Another Hole in the Head. We've won Telly Awards. We've got into Fear Fest. It got into Shudder. It screened on Shudder's Mid-May Massacre. Screened several times on that. It got into Horror Hound Weekend. Anyway, for what the film is, it did excellent. I could not be more happy. But the truth is, sort of cards on the table, there are certain New York horror film festivals that I've just never been able to get in. And the truth is, sometimes people have programming that they have a specific vision for films they want to play that year, and your film just doesn't fit in. Or some of these festivals are just so large that they're either not independent anymore, or they're in result they're taking like these $1 million pictures, and they really don't want too much low budget stuff unless you're like some heavy hitter established low budget filmmaker, and there's only a few of those. It's not sour grapes necessarily, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes you have these dreams. Let's say you're talking about colleges, I want to go to Harvard, I want to go to Yale, and you have those things and you're dead set on those things. But, you apply to those and you don't get in, but maybe you get into Columbia, right? So the point is, there may be other festivals just as important or more important that want your film. And so the real thing you have to do is, do as much research as possible, attend festivals, meet people, keep working on your film, make tons of films, make a lot of work, and you will know internally when something is truly of value. to some degree. I mean, most people are gonna crap on their own work, As an example, recently we got into Chicago Horror Film Festival, and that festival is running, I think, something like 25 years. It's one of the oldest horror festivals in a major city. It's incredibly important. It's one of the most important horror film festivals in the United States. And we got into that, and I entered. I took the leap, but I didn't have an expectation that we would possibly get in. Sometimes you just do stuff. You're like, I'm going to enter festivals. I'm going to take a risk, and you do it, and it actually worked this time. So we didn't get into some of the New York ones, but we got into ones that are even better. So that's the lesson that I think you can take. And to be honest, when I lived in Connecticut, I didn't get into a lot of important Connecticut film festivals. It was only, after I'd lived in New York for a decade and a half, I entered a few Connecticut ones, and I got into there. I don't know what that is, where sometimes it seems like the state that you live in doesn't appreciate your work as maybe other, states. Maybe it has to do with, if you lived in Texas and you saw, a New York film, it might just have a different flavor. There might just be something different to the art that maybe seems refreshing, so maybe there's something to that. There's this old saying that an expert comes from 500 miles away. It just means like, it's important. Hey, we're flying this guy. He lives 500 miles away. He's super important, It's, I do think there is something to that effect where not that, people are not necessarily appreciated as much in the state in which they live. So that's why people move for different careers. That's why people enter different film festivals that are out of state. So anyway, another thing we got into with this short doc I did, MacLeod, about Kevin MacLeod, the music composer, is I got into New Haven Docs, which I've gotten into that festival before. With the first VHS Massacre, actually, and we got to speak at Whitney Humanities Center at Yale University. So we're literally giving a talk at Yale, and so it was actually kind of it was important when it happened, but now looking back, it's been years since, and I was like, damn, man, I spoke at Yale University. And so I think that's what happens a lot in a film career, is that when important things are happening, you don't necessarily clock them as being profound. And a few years go by, and then you look back and you're like, oh, damn, that was like a big deal, So there are very few things that like at that moment is a huge deal, I did have a Q&A at Shudder's Mid-May Massacre about VHS Massacre 2, and Joe Bob Briggs, Lloyd Kaufman, Debbie Rochon, Professor James Richardson, Tim Kulig, and myself. We were all on this Q&A panel, and the panel went great. And the host said it was the best panel he had been a part of, and he thought it was amazing. And I think in that moment I was like, yeah, this could be the height of my career. I mean, I really hope it's not, but it occurred to me that it was a pretty good deal. So I know I'm sort of being braggadocious, but I think that hopefully maybe what you could take away from this is that you don't always get what you want, but try a bunch of other things, because you may find that there's something better in a different place. That's one thing. The second thing is, for this type of filmmaking, it does take sometimes decades. Everyone likes those overnight stories. Everyone likes to hear about Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, or Christopher Nolan. Everyone likes that. It's Darren Aronofsky, for instance, directed Pi for like $40,000 and then went to Sundance, And everyone likes to hear about, frankly, those super genius artists, But not everyone's like that. Some people like me, you need a couple decades to refine your craft and get better and figure out what you're good at. Those guys just, for some reason, figured out what they were good at and did that thing. Well, it took me 20 years to figure out what I was good at. It seems like I'm good at making feature-length documentaries. It seems like that's true. And so you just got to keep trying around at different things to figure out what you're good at. One of my best friends, Mike, he always wanted to be a feature filmmaker, and he did direct several features. And but it turns out his greatest gift is really, marketing and being an executive producer, creating YouTube content for esports teams and IGN and stuff like that. His sort of true genius, I think, lie in that type of film creation, video creation. And look, that's not to say he's not going to make his masterpiece on film one day, but he is already exceptional in that way. And so that's another thing too, is that really try to examine your work and see what you're good at, and you may figure out something, and it may take decades. Apparently Ira Glass was like that too. Took him until middle age to really figure out how to tell a story. He does stuff for NPR and stuff like that. This American Life, I think, was his big claim to fame. So anyway, to summarize on the whole film festival thing, I hope this was of some value. It wasn't too self-indulgent. But if you want to learn more about some of the stuff I've worked on, if you go to tomseymourfilms.wordpress.com or VHSmassacre.com. Actually, VHSmassacre.com will just lead you to my site. There's a tab off of there if you want to learn more about it. The last thing I'll leave you with is that I may be starting a new documentary. It depends how things bear out. Sometimes you get these ideas for documentaries and you just can't book the right people to interview. Things just don't come together. People are not interested in the way you hoped. And sometimes you actually don't end up doing those projects. And I had a discussion about this with our friends last night. I can't even remember the stuff I abandoned, but I definitely have started in on feature-length projects and worked for a few months on these things, and then just basically said it's not bearing fruit, and you realize this is a place you don't want to be, But right now, Troma has given me permission. Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hurst and Tom D'Amico have given me permission to use the North American Pictures catalog, which consists of a lot of action flicks, Billy Blank, Cynthia Rothrock, even Jackie Chan, Bolo Young. It also consists of Basket Case 2 and 3, Maniac Cop, Frankenhooker, things like that. So the documentary is called American Expendables, and it might be about the films of North American Pictures, paying homage to the sort of direct-to-video action flick of the 80s and 90s. And so we'll see. There may be a story there. There may not be. If I can't book Billy Blanks, if I can't book Cynthia Rothrock, then there may be no real motivation to do this project. So it's a matter of, making sure things are happen. Making sure things can happen on the film in which it will make a good film. And one of the last things I'll say is that what happened to me is I got put in a very specific situation where raising money for feature-length films was becoming more and more difficult. I was making these films on, the cash I had on hand was very small, maybe 10 to 15 grand. So we'd all save up and chip in and make a feature for 10 to 15 grand. And there was a time in the late 90s and through to maybe 2010 where people actually really did appreciate low-budget independent films. But I think that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit, especially with things like YouTube, whereas people, the scrutiny on narratives is so as such that it's almost impossible to break out, because people really do enjoy preemptively shitting on low budget filmmakers. It's very tough for them now. It was tough back then because you couldn't. It was just so hard to get your film out there. So now you can get your film out there, but everyone is frankly very unappreciative of this stuff. They would compare a Marvel movie alongside of an independent movie that costs $50,000. So it's just it just seemed like a game that at least I could never win the way it was done. The last narrative I did was this film called Mark of the Beast. It was a horror film. It won Platinum Remy at WorldFest Houston. It won some other awards, which was a top award. So it was really, it won some important awards, and it had some pretty solid reviews. Ain't It Cool gave it a decent review. But it really, it lost money, and, I think you can get it on Google Play, but it really didn't, it really didn't nail it in regard to getting it around. NVD did the distribution, but it just really didn't go somewhere. And so at that point, I was sort of depressed. Kim's Video was going on a business. The video store is going away, and that was one of the only ways that you could actually, make a profit back then, was to sell physical media, and frankly, it still is now. But so the point is, I was left with this desire and this ambition to make films, and in a situation where the edifice of independent filmmaking was sort of in shambles. And so what I figured out is, if you're careful, you use fair use, and you get permission to use the film clips that you can, or make sure all your you got all your releases and all your music licensing, you can make a documentary. You can make a feature-length documentary for almost nothing, for next to nothing, $500 maybe. You can do it if you just spend your time doing it over the course of 2 or 3 years. You can make a feature-length documentary that way. You have to make sure it's a subject matter that people have a fervor for and are excited about, and you have to make sure that you make it as such where it does not bore people. That is the worst thing that you can do, is bore people when you're making super low budget stuff, because they don't care. You don't have the best director of photography in the world. You don't have the best actors in the world. And so documentary gets away with it because you're interviewing real people on real subjects, and if you make sure the subject matter is important and in the zeitgeist, and that it's funny and entertaining, then you can make a go of it with documentary. So that's a lesson I learned from me. That at least works for me. It doesn't work for everyone. But so I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening. We're going to hear Tim Kulig. My best friend has an album coming out at the end of August, and one of these tunes is called Tertiary Algorithms, and I think it's super cool. So let's listen to the song. Put on your headphones and check out this music. If you're interested in using any of Tim Kulig's music for your film, he does have Creative Commons works. So you can either look at Gravitas Music, or if you can find a link on YouTube if you look up Tim Kulig Music. Anyway, check it out. It's super cool.